Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans. Welcome to The Bunker. In this video, I am going to attempt to answer the question, who is the most powerful governing body member? Of the 8 individuals currently at the pinnacle of the Jehovah's Witness hierarchy, individuals who call themselves the faithful and discreet slave, who claim to be God's appointed channel with mankind, of these 8 individuals, who is the most influential and who has the most sway over how decisions get made? I was in some indecision on this question right up until fairly recently, specifically December 2021. So I used to think that it had to be someone like David Splane. David Splane, for those of you who don't know, I've done many rebuttals to his talks on JW Broadcasting and his convention talks. Famously last year, he did a lengthy rant against apostates and spoke in defense of settling child abuse lawsuits and that sort of thing. He always struck me as the sort of character who could be pulling the strings, who could be kind of working in the shadows, having an influence over decisions that get made in governing body meetings. He always struck me as having that sort of Bond villain-esque quality of being very, very arrogant, very self-assured, very opinionated. If not David Splane, I figured it would be someone like Anthony Morris, who is extremely opinionated. Maybe Stephen Lett, although I'm not sure he has quite the intelligence, sorry Stephen, to kind of be any kind of mastermind. And an outside candidate for kind of pulling the strings would have been perhaps Jeffrey Jackson. Jeffrey Jackson, of course, famous for his appearance before the Australian Royal Commission in 2015. He seems to be fairly switched on, at least in terms of his cognitive abilities. He looks like he has perhaps the intelligence to, again, be stirring things up, making sure things go his way. I was wrong. I got the answer to this question, or what I consider to be a convincing answer to this question, in December 2021, when I interviewed Daniel Graves. Daniel Graves is a former bethelite at Wallkill, and I think he spent some time, I know he spent some time working on JW Broadcasting. He also worked on the Hospital Information Services desk for a period. So very well positioned within the organisation. A thumbnail will appear, if Tibor is gracious, to the full interview so that you can see everything that Daniel has to say, because it was a fascinating conversation that I thoroughly enjoyed. But we got to talking about Mark Sanderson. And Daniel had the following anecdote to share regarding his time working on the set of JW Broadcasting.
We also, one time, we shot an entire broadcast with Mark Sanderson on a particular tie. And if you know anything about pixels on a camera and then like certain patterns, you get this thing called moire, and it looks like it's dancing around. And so at the end of it, we realized we have to change out his tie, and we had to do it all over again. And you could actually visibly see him frustrated and angry. And he said, "You brothers have to get this together." And so you actually saw your overseer get reprimanded on the floor, and everyone's face was red, and you're kind of sinking in your chair. So there were moments on the floor that were very candid.
So I found that story very interesting, a very fascinating window into the psychology of Mark Sanderson, who comes across on camera as being very warm, very reasonable, very, laid back. But it seems that behind the scenes, he is prone to exactly the sort of arrogance that you would expect from someone who is taking the reins, who is driving the entire organization. And with that story fresh in your minds of Mark Sanderson reprimanding the crew at JW Broadcasting for not being switched on about what sort of tie he ought to wear, and bear in mind, JW Broadcasting is still a relatively new thing, and certainly when Daniel was working on the crew, they would have still been sorting things out and feeling their way through the filming process and what works and what doesn't work. I'm sure since then they've developed a policy whereby if you turn up with a certain sort of tie that's messing around with the resolution on the camera, you're going to get asked to take it off and replace it with a better tie, a tie that's not going to cause any problems. So I'm sure that since this period, things have moved on. But at the time when this happened, they were still feeling their way through the whole process. And bear in mind what Mark Sanderson had to say in a recent JW Broadcasting episode, in fact, the May 2022 episode, when it comes to putting up with one another.
Colossians chapter 3 and verse 13 says, "Continue putting up with one another and forgiving one another freely, even if anyone has a cause for complaint against another. Just as Jehovah freely forgave you, you must also do the same." For example, maybe a certain family did not include us in a gathering at their home, or a brother failed to greet us in the Kingdom Hall, or call on us to give a comment at the meeting. These things may irritate us or even hurt our feelings, but they are not sins that we need to forgive. They are mere slights or imperfections that we need to learn to put up with.
So Mark Sanderson is here talking about grievances, niggling little issues, imperfections and slights that are small, not serious sins, just things that happen from time to time that might irritate us. And it seems, from my point of view, to be one rule for him, another rule for everyone else. If it's an ordinary rank and file Jehovah's Witness, and someone does something that irritates you or inconveniences you, you've just got to put up with it. But when it's Mark Sanderson, and he's working on set at JW Broadcasting, he gets to remonstrate. He gets to reprimand the crew for not being switched on about every little thing when it comes to filmmaking. Is that not a situation in which he could have applied Colossians 3:13? Is that not a situation where he could have put up with his brothers and not made a scene and just humbly gone along with their suggestions? I'm highlighting this story because, again, when I heard it, obviously I'd never heard it before, anecdotes about governing body members and specifically their interactions with other Bethelites are few and far between. You know, it's mostly a very closed shop when it comes to getting leaks regarding stories about the governing body members who are there now and how they are interacting with Bethelites. So this was new to me, and the jigsaw pieces started falling into place during this conversation with Daniel. Then, towards the end of the conversation, we went through each and every governing body helper and governing body member. And when we came to discussing Mark Sanderson, this is what Daniel had to say. Mark Sanderson, you've already told us quite a bit about him, but if you could sum up.
probably the one that's driving the ship the most right now, which is kind of a surprising thing for a lot of people. They may think someone who is very vocal like a Morris, but Sanderson is very instrumental right now in trying to really steer the organization somewhere specific.
That's interesting.
Very intricate.
I can imagine, and actually, out of all the governing body members, I'm surprised they don't use him more, because he is the most natural on camera, and therefore I think the most convincing, if I can put it that way.
Yeah, most effective.
Isn't that interesting? Daniel Graves, former bethelite, who spent years working with the governing body members and various other high-ranking officials in the organization, when asked about Mark Sanderson, referred to him as probably the one who's driving the ship the most right now being as of the end of 2021, so just a few months ago, and trying to really steer the organization somewhere specific. That's the vibe that Mark Sanderson is giving out in Bethel that's being picked up by Bethelites like Daniel, or at least was being picked up by Daniel before he left, before he jumped ship. So you can see my surprise or my reaction on camera. I was taken aback. But again, the more I've thought about it since then, and I guess that's why I've decided to do a video specifically on this question, the more it just makes sense. He is, as I said in the interview, the most compelling on camera, the one who seems to be most in tune with reality. So people like Stephen Lett, people like David Splane, people like Anthony Morris seem to be living in a different version of reality to everyone else. They just seem to be so used to their bubble of influence, so drunk on power after decades and decades at the top, that they're not really in a position to exert any meaningful influence on any kind of long-term trajectory for the organization. Mark Sanderson, on the other hand, a relatively new appointment, much younger, clearly switched on. Obviously, I disagree with a lot of what he has to say when he does his JW Broadcasting appearances and convention talks. His JW Broadcasting episode for May 2022 was particularly culty, in which he was reminding Jehovah's Witnesses to stay united and that unity must be encouraged and pursued even at the expense of one's culture. You've got to jettison your culture in certain instances where it clashes with what the organization wants of you. Incredibly manipulative, culty, controlling rhetoric. Just in the latest JW Broadcasting episode, he's clearly got his own version of reality to some extent, but he's young enough and smart enough, in my opinion, to have a vision, to have an agenda, and to know how to exert influence on people. And the story about him behind the scenes on the JW Broadcasting set tells me that he is not afraid to ruffle feathers. He's not afraid to just say it like it is. And if something doesn't satisfy him, or if he's not happy about something, he's not going to be all meek and humble and accommodating as he wants Jehovah's Witnesses to be. He isn't afraid to tell people off or just say it like it is. And that is an essential quality of anyone who wishes to be in control of an organization. So as of now, maybe something will happen in the future to change my mind. Maybe I'll speak to someone else. Maybe there'll be another defector from Bethel who'll have a different story. So I reserve the right to change my mind. But as of now, I'm pretty convinced that Mark Sanderson is the most powerful, influential governing body member. When Daniel said he's trying to steer the organization somewhere specific, goodness knows exactly what that means. I guess maybe at some point Daniel would be good enough to come back and talk about it a little bit more. But is it somewhere good, I would ask? And straight away, I think the answer would be no, it isn't. Mark Sanderson has doubled down on the blood policy. That's part of what got him to where he is, because he was working in the Hospital Information Services Department. That was part of his rise up the ladder in the Jehovah's Witness hierarchy. He has made a name for himself standing up for and doubling down on the most heinous, grotesque policies and teachings that Jehovah's Witnesses currently have. So if he's taking the organization somewhere specific, I'm afraid we cannot expect it to be more towards a mainstream liberal direction. I think, if anything, Mark Sanderson could be taking the organization backwards, or at least he's capable of doing that. So those are all of my thoughts on this particular issue. I hope you found this video interesting or helpful. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lloyd Evans channel for more such videos. And as always, thank you for watching.